So, has everything you've heard for the past several months about conference realignment just been turned completely upside down?
You are Locked On ACC, your daily podcast on the Atlantic Coast Conference. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Shout out to the everydayers, and thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Playoffs have winded down. The sports have stopped sporting like we want them to, but this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On this episode, we will talk about what Kenton and what we're going to ask the ACC commish at the ACC Kickoff coming up in less than 2 weeks. I do want to talk about what I think is a classy move made by Florida State starting quarterback. And yeah, Florida State and Clemson have very much been in the news lately. And so, Kenton, this latest, people were looking at this last night like it was a bombshell about the Big 12's role in conference realignment. I have, over the last 12 hours, taken a crash course in what it means to try to separate real news and fake news, what it means to read quotes in context versus what it means to read quotes outside of context. So we started to get these a lot of social media posts and links to articles, some of which are maybe legit articles, some not so legit, about how, hey, like the Big 12 is now, they're about to add Florida State and Clemson, that advanced talks are going on with the Big 12 to add FSU and Clemson. And this all tied back to Ross Dellenger, who's now with Yahoo Sports, was with Sports Illustrated previously. He's a really good reporter. Like, this is a reliable source of information, Dellenger. And there's a lot of hysteria about what he said about the Big 12. Kenton from Locked On Wolfpack, would you like me to read the quote in better context based on what he said about the Big 12 and Florida State and Clemson?
Absolutely. Please do, because there's things I need to say, and I want you to get all the facts out before I get some very opinionated things out. So please, Donno, inform the people of the facts.
And also, when following up on Ross's X account, he backtracked from all the aggregation of what he said. And he said, like, everything that I said about this should be taken as hypothetical scenarios, that he wasn't trying to break news with this. So Ross Dellenger, he was, I think he was on like a radio appearance from the Big 12 Media Days, which are going on now. And he said, he was talking about Florida State's main objectives, them and Clemson, which would be, the top objectives would be joining the Big Ten or the SEC. Next objective would be reforming the ACC with a smaller number of teams, quote, where you would get a financial advantage because you wouldn't split the TV distribution with 18. Maybe you would just split it with 10, he said. And then he added option 3 is to probably join another league. Obviously, there's only one other power conference league that hasn't been mentioned, and that's the Big 12. So you look at those options, and again, they probably prefer number 1, he said, but I don't know that that's going to happen because the SEC has schools in those states already, in Florida and South Carolina, and the Big Ten. I don't know how interested they are in coming south, he says. I mean, those things might happen, but I think that there is at least early conversation. He says, I think there is at least early conversation between the Big 12 and those schools about the possibility. I don't know if it's anything serious yet because they have to get out of the ACC, whether that's through a settlement or a court ruling. So we could be months, if not years, away from something. But that does seem to be one of the possibilities, is the Big 12, he says. So, okay, you hear that. It does sound like he's spitballing a little bit, but it's based on his informed opinions and his knowledge of the college football landscape. And Ross Dellenger knows that better than most. But I don't, in actually seeing that quote in context, Kenton, I don't think he's really saying some of the things that people were claiming he did about, hey, there's advanced talks between the Big 12 and Florida State and Clemson, and that's definitely what they're going, is what people were trying to say.
There's also advanced talks between myself and Megan Thee Stallion. Coming off of her latest album, we're in advanced talks to start our dating. I
Dude,
didn't want to
big
break
if
the
true.
news. I didn't want to break the news on Locked On ACC, but I know she's a very private person, Miss Pete. We'll talk later. You see how people can just say things even if they're not true? You see how things work out even if they're not true at all? I am not kidding you when I say this would be the most expensive lateral move in the history of maybe not just sports, but possibly mankind. I cannot think of a moment where I would say, man, those people really spent $200 million to break even in any other scenario but this one here. Obviously, Ross was not saying this is a serious thing that could happen. Regardless of how disgruntled they are with the ACC, they're not leaving for the Big 12. And let me say this right now, because Drake Keontae Toll, I know you're going to get on there, and I know you're going to sit here and tell everybody the ACC is over, party is official.
They're all coming to the Big 12.
And FSU. Drake, put down stop partying with those Savannah Bananas, okay? Stop it. I know that they say the party never stops, but I know, Drake, I know the rule is if you never stop drinking, you can't get a hangover. But stop it. It's ruining your brain. It's no good for you, okay? The reality of this thing is very simple. They are either going to the Big Ten or the SEC, and I want to put this on record. I was the first person to say they're very likely going to have to go at a discounted rate because neither conference has an incentive to give them a full payout immediately. Nobody does. Even if they come over full rights in tow and intact. If they had the power to pay their way out and go independent and generate this type of revenue yearly, they would have already done so. So you pretty much put yourself, as the old song goes, you got clowns to the left of me, jokers to the right, and here I am stuck in the middle with you. That's where these two teams are. They're stuck in the middle right now. And again, am I saying that they won't find a landing place in the SEC or Big Ten? No. What I am saying is look out for the possibility that they have to take a discounted rate or a prorated rate as compared to the other teams that are getting full cuts right away, which would just be a shame because, again, they're not going to the Big 12.
And by the way, to what Kenton said, shout out to our guy Drake Toll, he's been crushing it on Locked On Big 12, and I know he's going to be all over this story.
Absolutely.
So make sure you make Locked On Big 12 your second listen today. But just circling back, Kenton, how much stock do you put in? Because again, like I know Dellenger, he even said, like I'm speaking in hypotheticals, but his hypotheticals are informed with real information he gets. And when he talked about the SEC and the Big Ten, he certainly doesn't make it sound like they're in, right? Because there are certain, reporters and sharers of information out there who say, Florida State, they've got an automatic bid already to the Big Ten, and they've been approved by Fox. That's been out there a lot. Maybe Dellenger is just being very conservative and keeping his information close to the vest, but I'll go back to part of his quote. He says, I don't know that it's going to happen because the SEC has schools in those states already in Florida and South Carolina. And the Big Ten, he says, I don't know how interested they are in coming south. So again, I don't know how literal I should take what he said there, because we've obviously heard a lot of things from the Big Ten side. They've already expanded into California and that they would like to maybe increase their footprint into SEC territory, which would be Florida and South Carolina. But Dellenger makes it sound like he's not so sure that's the case.
This feels like I feel like Leonardo DiCaprio in that scene from Django where they finally figure out that Django is there for Tildy. There have been a lot of lies told at this table tonight. And the reality is this. I don't believe that there is a done deal yet. What I do believe is that both of these schools know, hey, we bring enough to where we're not dividing the pie. We're adding in.
Right.
I think both of these schools know that. And therefore, both of these schools know fiscally it makes sense for you all to add us. That's what I think is the case here. It doesn't matter whether or not the Big Ten is in the South or not. It doesn't matter whether or not you have schools. It does not matter. You're going to add teams that add something of consequence to your conference, period. That's all there is to it. The only question that I have is whether or not they bring them in at a full rate, be it the SEC, be it the Big Ten, because again, you're looking at a situation where it's like, oh, well, you all have competition with the Big Ten, or you all have competition with the SEC, and we know that major corporations and businesses never get together and collude to keep the price of their labor force down. They never collude to raise the prices of anything. That would not happen because that's illegal. Just like these schools would not have had backdoor conversations to already secure themselves a contract. All of these things are illegal, and we follow the law, or at least we believe folks do. So I'm very interested to see how this thing plays out. Once we get out of the courts, once all of that is settled, I'm still interested to see how this thing plays out in terms of where both of these schools land.
Yeah, and part of the Dellenger quote was, he cautions like this could take months, if not years. So he's
Right.
not one of these people who's like, oh yeah, by next week they're going to have a new. He's not one of those folks out there. And we have other things to talk about on this episode, but there is one more thing I want to add about these Big 12 rumors, is in terms of what the payout might look like and where the money would come from. I think is an important part of this conversation. And we will talk as well when we come back about, the ACC kickoffs are coming up starting July 22nd in Charlotte. We're going to be there locking it down for Locked On ACC. And, every team in the ACC is going to send 3 football players there. We don't know who's going yet. They haven't released that, but we do know someone who's not, and we will explain why when we come back. You want to keep it locked right here, my friends. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. And guys, I'm only getting started with FanDuel, and I know what you're thinking. The sports are not currently, sportsing the way that you'd like them to, because the NBA Finals and the Stanley Cup Finals have wound down. Guys, I'm not ashamed to admit I have had action on NBA Summer League games. I've had action on Major League Baseball games. I've had action on international soccer games. Thank you, England. I cashed a betting ticket, England over the Netherlands yesterday, and I'm looking at England and Spain in the final of Euro 2024. I am favoring Spain at -135 is what I'm looking at there. And folks, there's so much action to be had at FanDuel, because this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. And, if you're enjoying the content and the things we've talked about so far, again, make Locked On Big 12 your second listen today, because our guy Drake Toll, he is going to be all over the Big 12 angle of all these reports, and he absolutely crushes it with his show. I am Alex Donno from Locked On Canes. He is Kenton Gibbs from Locked On Wolfpack. So, Kenton, a part of this scenario, if the Big 12, and listen, I do not have any doubt that the Big 12 would be interested in adding Florida State and Clemson, and possibly adding Miami down the road. Notre Dame is still independent, so I'm sure they could make a play for Notre Dame, because Brett Yormark, their commissioner, is very aggressive. And part of what makes the Big 12 so aggressive is all this talk about private equity. So part of the theories that people have in, like, when you bring in Florida State and Clemson, how do you make sure they're getting paid a bigger piece of the pie, not only than what they were making in the ACC, but also a bigger piece of the pie as to what other Big 12 members are making? Because the hypothesis is the Big 12 could be willing to actually do an unequal revenue split and pay Florida State and Clemson more. And the common denominator as to where that extra money would come from, Kenton, is private equity. So you'd be taking on potentially hundreds of millions of dollars of debt. I am a proud capitalist, but I acknowledge when it comes to the lender-borrower scenario, you'd much prefer to be on the lender side of that equation than the borrowing side of that equation. So you could potentially be looking at the Big 12 taking on a whole lot of debt and hoping we make it so big we'll be able to pay that back later with no problem.
I believe it was Michael McDonald who made the song, "What a Fool Believes He Sees," because this is one of those moments where it's like, we all know this is the fool's goldest of fool's gold of fool. This is a painted rock, okay? But let's talk about it. let's go down the hypothetical road. Let's play Marvel what if for what would happen if the Big 12 were to secure the private equity money. How long are you on the hook for that? And how much, what then happens? What power do you then give all of this new private equity money in terms of doing things and making decisions in your conference? What happens? Because, Donno, you and I have both warned. Hey, this is what happens when you get private equity involved. We have seen it. Private equity, when they give you that instant cash, that fast cash, my mother has a saying, easy come, easy go. Okay? And if that money, if you think it's as easy as, well, we'll just, give them a couple naming rights or something, and they'll pay. You will look up and you will say, wait a minute, I thought we were the Big 12 conference. No, we're the Red Herring Equity Conference now. That's who you are now.
That's right.
Yeah, where RHE is right here for you all, okay? Hey, when you think football, think RHE. That's what's going to happen to you messing around with private equity. And that's a best case scenario, mind you. That's a scenario in which the commissioner doesn't lose his job because, we've decided to put a more fiscally responsible commissioner in. That's assuming that they don't sell off all their properties and lease them back to them or something like that, which we've seen in the past. So honestly and truly,
right.
If you are teams looking for a new conference and you have to go to a place where private equity is on the line, I'm sorry to tell you, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news. I really don't. It's not the answer. That's not the right answer. Don't do it. Reconsider. Resubmit. You sure on the subject? You sure? That's all I got to say on that.
Amen to that. All right, so let's move on. ACC Kickoff Media Days is going to begin on July 22nd, and I believe Florida State student athletes will be available that first day. They have like 3 to 4 teams with players each day. I think Florida State is on the docket for the first day. Now, the ACC, at some point next week, I think they're going to finalize and publish the list of the players who will be all the head coaches will show up, but each head coach is going to bring 3 football players with them. We don't have that list yet, but we do have one player who has publicly stated he's not going, and he explained why, and that's DJ Uiagalelei, the new quarterback at Florida State University. Now, quarterbacks, Kenton, as you know, are always very popular at these conference media days. Like most teams will bring their starting quarterbacks.
It's almost seen as a red flag if you don't bring your quarterback now.
Right. And so people are obviously going to wonder why DJ is not there. So he released a statement. He said, I was honored to be invited by the conference office to represent Florida State at this year's ACC Kickoff. The experience of attending that event in 2021 and 2022, that was when he was at Clemson, is among the highlights of my time in college. That might be an exaggeration, but it's a nice thing to say. He says, I appreciate being viewed as one of the conference's top players. However, I feel strongly that Florida State should be represented by players who were part of last year's ACC championship team. The players who helped put this program back on top of the ACC should have the opportunity to be recognized for their contributions. This team is more than its quarterback, and I'm excited for my teammates who will experience this fantastic event. I can respect that, right? DJ wants the spotlight for the guys that won the conference title last year. And I'm sure whoever does show, and it's funny because there's not a lot of the same players are here from last year. Right, so I would imagine like Lawrence Toafili is going to be, I don't know who else is going to be there. A lot of new players, but I'm sure they're going to be asked a lot of questions about the playoff snub and everything last year.
You know, the biggest thing is this. When you think about DJU, one thing that has always come to the forefront when talking about him, class act. He's a class act. Yeah. He has always been that. He handled the benching at Clemson like a class act. He handled leaving Clemson like a class act. He handled the departure from Oregon State like a class act. There's never been a moment where you look at DJU and you say, I have character concerns about this young man. Never.
Yeah,
never.
Right.
You can tell he was raised right. You can tell that he was raised in a house that emphasized respect, kindness, generosity, all those things. And this is just another moment that reemphasizes that selflessness and all that. And I'm going to take it to on the field here for a moment. When you have a quarterback who leads like this, it does something to the team. It does something to the core of the team. because when your leaders are we guys, not me guys, it makes it hard to not follow the example that they set. It makes it hard to not say, hey, this is how it works. Or I'll even with him transferring in, I talk a lot about how transfers, if you get too many, they set the culture. Having a guy set the culture in this vein of like, it's us, it's not me. It's one for all, not all for one. That right there, that's again, you want to play for that guy. You want to follow that example. When your best players are some of the best people on the team, that's when you have something special, because you don't have to do all the policing and do all of the, hey, make the right decision, do the right thing, that you would have to when, with all due respect, some of your best players are guys that you're like, we need a handler with him at all times. Hey, watch him around women. Hey, watch him if he gets 1 or 2 shots and just somebody be close. Having a young man like this lead your team, it's nothing but a positive.
No, that's well said. In terms of, I mentioned there's not been an official list yet of which players are showing up. I think I know who's going from Miami, if anyone's been wondering. Now, again, this could all be subject to change once the list comes out, but something that I was told as of a couple weeks ago, I am expecting offensive tackle Jalen Rivers, who's one of the leaders of the team and a great talker, great interview. So he will represent Miami very well. I am expecting Cam Ward to be there. So that is one quarterback who will be there. And Ward, you talk about DJ Uiagalelei setting the example with his leadership. I've been very impressed with the way Ward has handled himself and his interactions with teammates for the short time he's been there. Because much like DJ, these guys are both just going to be at their new schools for 1 year. They are one and dones at Miami and Florida State. And the third player I'm expecting for Miami is linebacker Kiko Maui-Noa. So I think, and again, something could have changed since I heard about this a couple weeks ago, but I'm expecting Jalen Rivers, Cam Ward, and Kiko. We will see how that plays out. And, in keeping in the theme of the upcoming ACC Media Days, what should we ask the commish? You want to keep it locked right here on this brand new episode of Locked On ACC. Thank you so much for making Locked On ACC your first listen and your first watch today. Hey, are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? You have to turn down the volume with all that shouting. Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Now, Kenton, you have become notorious in recent years for asking Jim Phillips some of the toughest but best questions. And you're not trying to dunk on the guy or anything, but you're not one to ask softballs. So what would you like to hear? With the ACC, so much turbulence right now in the conference. Yeah. What would you like to ask ACC Commissioner Jim Phillips in a couple weeks?
Well, you see, Donno, I love the word turbulence, and I love compliments even more. Journalism is supposed to push you. It's supposed to get in you and make you get to those places where we got to get the important questions or answers, the important questions answered, rather. So my question would be, in this environment with what's going on, nationally with conference realignment, and obviously what is seemingly your two top dogs heading for greener pastures elsewhere, what is your role in steering the ACC clear of some very choppy waters at the moment? What's your role in that, and how are you going about that at the moment? Because, objectively speaking, I know he's going to get up there and say, hey, we've done this, we've accomplished this, these are all the things that we're doing. But there needs to be the question asked, like, what are you in particular doing? Because, with all due respect, the question is not pointed. It's very open-ended. But my personal opinion on Phillips, I don't think he's a bad commissioner. I think that he's a bad showman for a commissioner. Correct. All of the best commissioners are excellent showmen. They know how to do the, look at me, look at us, we're great. We got it all going on over here. Why do you think the Big 12 has the luster and the shine and all this perceived stability that they do, despite them being in virtually the exact same situation as what the ACC is in, but worse.
Just strictly the fact that the Big 12, who always used to hold their media days in Texas, that they moved it to Las Vegas, like right there, that should tell you showmanship is at the forefront. Like the ACC still does theirs in Charlotte. Maybe the ACC should move theirs to Miami and bring a little more flair and pageantry. But yeah, the Big 12 now does theirs in Vegas.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I understand that there is different folks have different temperaments and all that good stuff, but there are certain jobs that you have to have a certain, like you can't be the president if you don't have a demanding presence. That just should not be. That's not something we have seen it. And, this is not to get into politics or anything like that. We've seen it time and time again. That presence means something. Being a commissioner, that showmanship means something because that means you can effectively advocate for your conference in a way. You can convince people you are, in essence, the Wizard of Oz in certain ways when it comes to your conference. Everything has to be good. Nobody can see behind the curtain. You can't have that moment in The Wiz where Richard Pryor says, "You got me, I'm a fraud. I'm a fraud." You can't have that moment. You can't let other people paint that moment for you because you need to be the all-powerful wizard. The ACC is doing wonderful. We're strong. We're great. I was just on ESPN the other day talking about it. I was just on Fox the other day talking about it. I was all these places telling everybody how great the ACC is. He needs to do a better job of that. But again, in the meantime, in between time, we need to have that question of what does your role look like and how is it changing with this landscape? Because I think that a role of a commissioner right now is very different than a role of a commissioner in 2015. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, 1,000,000%. And my question to Jim Phillips, which is kind of along the same line as yours, is it's a little bit more specific in one aspect. Since the ACC they've just added 3 new members. I want to ask him: is there an openness to expand further, to add more members, and is there any timetable on that process? Basically saying, are you? And obviously they could be about to lose schools, we know that, but in terms of additions, are they happy with what they're at now, or do they want to add any more? And again, to what you say about showmanship, I'd be very curious to hear about how Jim Phillips answers that question, because I feel like if I were to ask that same question, and people have this week, I asked that same question to Brett Yormark, the Big 12 commissioner. He's very open that, hey, we'll add anybody we feel adds our value. We want to compete with the Power 2 or the Big 2 now, the SEC and the Big 10. So I'd be curious to see just how boisterous Mr. Phillips would be about that, or if he gives some political answer like, well, we're extremely happy with the 3 schools we've just added, and I think the ACC is stronger today, and there's no reason to think we're not in a great position right now. I feel like the answer would be something like that. Do you not?
Right. Yeah, I agree. And that's the problem. That's the problem. Yeah. When I ask you, hey, are you looking to expand? I want an affirmative. You're damn right. We're looking, we're going, obviously without the cursing, you're polished, you're like 60, you bet your sweet bippy we're looking to expand and we're da-da-da-da-da. Or no, at the moment, expansion is not on the table. We added 3 teams that we feel like make us stronger as a conference. We're not doing expansion for expansion's sake. If there are teams that we look at that we could say, hey, this team adds a lot of value, then by all means, we will be more than happy to add that team in. But at the moment, that's just not the case. That's not really, how Jimmy P operates. So we'll see.
Right. Well, we'll have more for you guys tomorrow. We'll wrap up the week strong on another episode tomorrow of Locked On ACC. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.